Hello, and thanks for joining me. Today we're looking at a YouTuber named David John Wellman, an atheist who has amassed a modest following over the last year. He has a degree in philosophy, or so he claims, and he makes video essays about the various arguments for and against the existence of God, as well as responses to apologists whom he tends to cram into the lower right corner of his screen, like this. Hey, how do you like your own treatment there, Wellman? Kinda cramped down there, isn't it? Anyway, last month he did a video called Creationism, Science, and Atheism, which is just kind of an overall look at young Earth creationism and its many, many problems. In the video, Wellman said this. In response to this argument, YouTuber Palogia reconstructed the entirety of the film. How embarrassing. Anyone with any atheist cred at all, certainly someone who must have learned in philosophy class that it's important to be precise with one's words, should know that it's pronounced Palogia, not Palogia. Whatever this Wellman guy is smoking, can I have some? But seriously, folks, my apologies to Palogia for mispronouncing his name. I'm still reeling from that little blunder, so much so that when it comes to the last name of the guy we're actually looking at today, an evangelist named Eric, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. I'm too afraid of getting it wrong. Anyway, Eric seems to be a Gay Poirot kind of evangelist who focuses on making short videos aimed for short attention span content. The first one is called Atheists Have to Answer This Question. Hashtag Christianity, hashtag atheism. So people are putting hashtags in the titles now. I'm not a big fan of being told what I have to do because of my atheism, especially by a guy who, as we're going to see, does not understand atheism.
One of the most unsettling questions an atheist has to answer is...
Whoa, hold up. You're doing that one word at a time subtitle thing as well? Man, that's just... I don't see atheists doing that, do you?
If we want to believe that these men saw Jesus alive, we have to take the word of anonymous authors, decades later, and thousands of miles away.
Oh. Well, I guess it's just a thing now. Now that YouTube is really pushing the short videos, I guess we're going to see even more of it, even from older folks like me appealing to the social media crowd. You know, personally, I have all but abandoned social media except for this YouTube channel, and I am very content with my life without social media. It actually does not detract from my life to not know what my cousin Rhonda's lunch looks like, or what score my high school's best friend's ex-girlfriend's old roommate got on whatever game is popular these days. And I won't even go into politics. And all the time I'm spending not on social media these days, I read. I'm finally catching up on my reading. Right now I'm working on Centennial by James Michener, and like most of his books, the first chapter is a...
One of the most unsettling questions an atheist has to answer is there meaning to life?
Why do you think that's unsettling? Because you've been taught that atheists don't have a meaning of life, that only religion, and specifically only Christianity, can give a meaning to life? Actually, that's an interesting point. What do you do about Islamic claims that Allah and only Allah can provide meaning to life? You can't use the tactics you're using on atheism. You can't accuse Muslims of being nihilist, as I know you're about to do to atheists, because they don't have a metaphysical grounding for the meaning of life, because Muslims think they do have a metaphysical grounding for the meaning of life. What do you say to someone like that?
One of the world's most famous atheists, Richard Dawkins, wrote a book called A River Out of Eden, A Darwinian View of Life.
Do you remember the last time when an evangelist wanted to make atheism look bad by citing someone other than Dawkins, Hitchens, or Harris? Seriously, for the last 15 years, 98% of the time, that's their go-to boogeyman, isn't it? And in the year since Hitchens passed away, I'm hearing him cited less and less often with every passing year. What will you folks do when Dawkins and Harris die? Who will be your atheist boogeyman then?
And in it he says, the universe that we observe has no purpose, no good, no evil, just pitiless indifference. That is the consistent view of atheism, that life has no meaning or purpose.
When you say consistent view of atheism, consistent with what? With being an atheist? Not believing in the existence of something has no implications for one's worldview other than you cannot believe in anything which logically entails the existence of the thing you don't believe in. I don't believe in Vishnu or Brahma, neither do you, but that doesn't mean we have any parts of our worldview in common. Consistent meaning consistent over time, or consistent with other atheists? There is no consistent atheist worldview. There is no worldview that is shared by all atheists. Every time I mention the fact that I am a moral realist and a moral objectivist, I raise a few eyebrows among my fellow atheists. When you say consistent, Eric, What you mean is, I think, consistent with apologetic and evangelistic stereotypes of atheism. It helps your stereotyping that Richard Dawkins is one of the most quote-mineable atheist activists out there. In his book, The Blind Watchmaker, he wrote the following: "It is as though they," referring to fossils from the Cambrian explosion, "were just planted there without any evolutionary history." Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. Evolutionists of all stripes believe, however, that this really does represent a very large gap in the fossil record, a gap that is simply due to the fact that, for some reason, very few fossils have lasted from periods before about 600 million years ago. In a later book, Dawkins calculated, based on a web search, that the number of times people quoted just this sentence of the passage outnumbered the times that people quoted the context for the passage, namely the explaining sentence here, by a ratio of about 8 to 1. Dawkins calls this the quote mining index. So let's look at this passage from River Out of Eden.
The universe that we observe has no purpose, no good, no evil.
For starters, you didn't even read your own thing right. Dawkins didn't say that the universe has no purpose. He said the universe has the properties we would expect if there is at bottom no purpose. Here's a hypothesis. Here's what we would expect to see given that hypothesis. Let's see if we see it. It's called science, and it's what makes your videos possible. But more importantly, the sentence you actually spoke, the one you claim is the consistent view of atheism, what is the subject of that sentence? The universe. So what is the sentence about? The universe. And what is the sentence not about? Us. The fact that we have no meaning or purpose as far as the universe is concerned has no more significance or impact to the actual meaning of our life than does the fact that we have no meaning or purpose as far as a rock is concerned. No, I don't mean this rock. This rock thinks you're awesome. I mean this rock. Are you really so full of yourself that you can't see yourself as special unless this rock also sees you as special? Or are you so insecure that you see everything you do as futile unless you have the rock's seal of approval? But let's not fool ourselves. You're not talking about a rock, either rock. You're talking about God. If God does not exist, then the only implication of that is that God does not give our lives meaning or validate the meaning we give ourselves, any more than Big Bird does. Now, as someone who grew up with Big Bird, I might find that a bit disappointing because I love Big Bird. Who doesn't love Big Bird? But is my life meaningless if Big Bird doesn't give me a meaning or validate my meaning? And does that change if Big Bird is really, really powerful? If Big Bird created the universe? If Big Bird sacrificed himself to solve a problem he created himself? No one has given any reason to think that atheism, still less every single non-Christian worldview out there, entails nihilism. I've done a whole video on this subject, atheism and the meaning of life. Check it out.
But we don't live that way. We live as if things matter in this world. We live as if life actually has meaning, and you have meaning and are here for a reason.
Certainly things matter to me. Certainly things matter to everyone around me. Why is that not enough? How do you go from things don't have infinite meaning or things don't have cosmic meaning to things don't have any meaning at all? That's just not valid.
Everybody on this earth exists for a purpose, and we're created by God and for a relationship with God.
Now, you tried to sneak another little logical fallacy by us here. To show it, let me replay that last part along with the few seconds preceding it for context.
We live as if things matter in this world. We live as if life actually has meaning, and you have meaning and are here for a reason. Everybody on this earth exists for a purpose, and we're created by God and for a relationship with God.
He went from we live as if things matter to things matter, pretty much without pausing for breath, without justifying this inference. I'm not saying I disagree with the conclusion because, like I said, things matter very much to me and everyone around me, but your leap of logic there is like going from a 7-year-old kid is playing on the furniture as if the floor is lava to the floor is in fact lava. Your statements would no more convince an actual nihilist than a 7-year-old acting as if the floor is lava would convince a geologist or a volcanologist.
That Jesus created you specifically with value, with dignity and worth, and that your life actually has meaning.
This is what I'm talking about. How do you respond to Muslims who say that life is meaningless without Allah? You're kind of stuck there, aren't you? Because you can't quote mine Dawkins, can you? Now let's go to the other video. This one is called When People Doubt God's Existence, Earth emoji, Thinking Person emoji, #God, #atheist, #Jesus. Man, I feel old.
Sometimes people tell me that they don't believe God exists or they're uncertain about God's existence, and I always respond to them assertively, but with gentleness and respect.
Why does that sound so yucky?
And I tell them, you know that God exists. You know this to be true.
Oh, you know what this means. It's time for... But wait, he's giving it a slightly different slant this time.
Sometimes people tell me that they don't believe God exists or they're uncertain about God's existence.
He intends for Romans chapter 1, which he's going to cite in a second, because of course he is, to be utilized in response not only with those who don't believe in God, but those who say they are uncertain about whether God exists. Which means his interpretation of Romans 1 is that everyone is certain that God exists. That, as we will see, makes the unbeatable argument even stronger.
And the reason why I know that is because Romans chapter 1 teaches that all people know that God exists, so they're without excuse because he's revealed himself to everybody, so everybody knows that God exists.
So let's do something a little bit different this time. Let's perform a syllogistic analysis of our respective positions. Your position is this. 1. If the author of Romans, and most scholars believe it was written by Paul, if the author of Romans is correct, then I being the atheist who was listening to your argument, am certain that God exists. 2. The author of Romans is correct. 3. Therefore, I am certain that God exists. My position is this. 1. If the author of Romans is correct, then I, again the atheist who is listening to you, am certain that God exists. This is exactly the same first premise as your argument. 2. I am not certain that God exists. In fact, I personally am as certain as it's possible to be that God does not exist. 3. Therefore, the author of Romans is incorrect. Now, which of these two arguments should I accept? Well, the first premise is exactly the same for each, so if that fails, then I should accept neither argument. So just for now, let's assume that it doesn't fail. That means it comes down to which argument's second premise I, the atheist, have more reason to believe. That the author of Romans is correct, or that I am not certain that God exists. With respect to the latter, I have my own immediate and direct knowledge of what I believe and what I don't believe. And there is no more certain knowledge than immediate and direct knowledge. And that's probably the cue for the apologist to say, well, it just so happens that I have immediate and direct knowledge of God speaking to me, which presents the atheist with the following dilemma. Either God exists, or the Christian is mistaken. Which is not much of a dilemma. It might be if all the millions of Christians in the world who claim that God talks to them were consistent about what he was saying to them, but they are not, which tells us that at least part of their experience comes from their own mind. And if part, why not all? Especially when we know that religious experiences can have naturalistic causes. Millions of Christians can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. On the other hand, in support of the proposition that the author of Romans is correct, I have... What? What can you offer here? See, I'm not challenging you to prove that God exists, or that Jesus is his son, or that Paul wrote the book of Romans. I'm asking what reason we have to believe that Paul, or whoever wrote Romans, was correct about this particular thing. And the only way you can answer is with some kind of evidence. But what kind of empirical evidence should carry greater weight than my own immediate and direct knowledge of what I believe and what I don't believe? This is called a Moorean shift after philosopher G.E. Moore. One of his areas of study was talking about situations in which you are more certain of a proposition than you are of the premises of any argument to the contrary. This is the kind of reasoning that is used by Christians all the time in the face of such arguments as the argument from evil and the argument from divine hiddenness. Christians claim that they are more certain that God exists than they are of the premises of any atheist argument, and so they reject the arguments even when they can't say what's wrong with them. Well, this is the same logic applied to evangelical interpretations of Romans chapter 1. And what makes this an unbeatable argument for atheism is, unless I'm very much mistaken, evangelists like Eric will not say that it just coincidentally happens to be true that every atheist knows for certain that God exists. Rather, they'll say that it follows inexorably from the fact that God does exist, which means we can replace the first premise with, if God exists, then I am certain that God exists. And the rest of the argument goes, I am not certain that God exists, therefore God does not exist. This argument will not convince evangelists like Eric, but it will convince anyone who is uncertain that God exists and knows it. The fact that evangelists believe that no one falls into that category makes the argument even stronger, in fact unbeatable, because if you don't acknowledge that there's a problem, you obviously aren't going to fix the problem.
But the reason why people don't believe in God, they profess to not believe in God.
Nope, too late for that. That ship has sailed. Your video is not called When People Claim to Doubt God's Existence. It's called When People Doubt God's Existence. Earth emoji, thinking person emoji, hashtag God, hashtag atheist, hashtag Jesus. You could have gotten rid of one of those hashtags and inserted the phrase claim to. You didn't. Also, let's go back to the first video and look at a few bits from that.
One of the most unsettling questions an atheist has to answer. One of the world's most famous atheists, Richard Dawkins, wrote a book called A River Out of Eden. That is the consistent view of atheism.
You didn't call Richard Dawkins a professed atheist, you called him an atheist. You didn't say that meaninglessness is the professed atheist view, you said it's the atheist view. I know you're doing short videos here, less than a minute, but you still have time there to say the word professed 3 or 4 times. I mean, just look at what Gabe Poirot managed to do.
Science backs up the fact that God exists. You know, the Bible says in Genesis, God created the heavens and the earth. He said, let there be light, and there was light. All this amazing creation was created by the word of God. Why do you think atoms stayed together?
Look how fast that guy talked. And you're using his, captioning things, so it's not like there's any danger of anyone missing your words. In fact, websites that advertise these services would have you believe, and maybe it's true, that most people who watch short videos like that don't even have the sound on. So it would not have killed you to throw in the word professed. The most likely reason I think you didn't say professed atheist in that first video is that you don't consistently believe it. And the reason I precede that phrase with most likely is, I don't claim to know with certainty what you believe and what you don't believe. I would never claim that. I would have to be an idiot to claim that.
It has to do with spiritual resistance. They don't desire to be with God because they love their sin.
If circumstances permitted, I would invite you to take a close look at the way I'm living my life and challenge you to answer this question. What actions am I taking that are A, something I'm so attached to that I am willing to be literally, physically tortured, literally forever? Because if I, quote, know that God exists, then it stands to reason that I, quote, know that that's what's going to happen to me. And B, proscribed by Christianity and only by Christianity. Because if I'm doing something that Christianity and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and Scientology all say are wrong, then it's just as easy to say that I'm trying to avoid engagement with Allah, Brahma, Siddhartha, or Dianetics auditors as it is to say I'm trying to avoid engagement with your God.
And so my encouragement would be, if someone tells you that, to cut to the heart. Find out what sin is holding them back from living a life with Jesus, living a life with God.
What kind of sin do you have in mind? You strike me as the kind of person who believes that homosexuality is a sin, and there are a great many gay people and allies who are Christians, so clearly that's not holding them back from a life with Jesus. It may be holding them back from a life that you say they should live, or that you say Jesus says that they should live, but that's a you problem, not a them problem. Unless, of course, you can prove that your interpretation of Scripture is objectively correct, and the only way to do that is to have God come down and clearly tell us which one is correct. Everything else is based on human reasoning and human insight, and you can tell me all you want that it's guided by the Holy Spirit because your opponents are claiming the exact same thing. So, with a few exceptions, such as murder, everything that you regard to be a sin is accepted and sometimes even embraced by some denomination of Christianity somewhere in the world. Unless I'm a serial killer, I can find a version of Christianity which suits me and will accept me. What's holding me back is, I don't think any of it is true, whether you like it or not.
Usually, it's about they don't want to be held accountable to this God. This God does exist. You know that this God exists. So just stand firm on what God has said.
So far as we can prove, God hasn't said a thing. Actually, let me rephrase that because I think it's important to be clear on this point. As far as you can prove, God hasn't said a thing. Look, I get it. It's a lot easier to do your job of evangelism if you don't actually have to prove that any of it is true. It's a lot easier if you take the approach, as Banana Man's sidekick has done, of circumnavigating the intellect and appealing directly to the conscience. which is the intellectual equivalent of a loan applicant circumnavigating the bank and going directly to the jewelry box in the bank manager's home. And by the way, who are you accountable to? Clearly, if you felt you were accountable to God for intellectual integrity, you wouldn't be suggesting this method of evangelism. But as many theologians have pointed out, if God does exist, then surely He would want us to responsibly use the brains that He has given us. So is it possible that there's a sin you're committing that you don't want to be accountable for? Is that why you continue to interpret Romans in this way even after the problems have been pointed out to you? Because the fact is, I have no fear of being accountable to a just God. Emphasis on just. If you believe in an unjust God, that's your problem. If you enjoyed this video and want to help my channel grow, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Be sure to hit the bell to be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to share your thoughts on Eric the Evangelist or that jerk David John Wellman, leave a comment below. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. You help make this channel possible. If you'd like to become a supporter, check out the link in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. I'm David John Wellman, and the rest is up to you.